The following document dated May 1979 and was found on July 7, 1986 in an IBM copier that had been purchased at a surplus sale. Listening to this, I realized I said something in my previous video which is not true. That is, it would take the whole army of the world to destroy humanity. That is absolutely not true. What you will hear now is a declaration of a domestic war, social control, and destruction of human life, not by weapons, but by social engineering. Silent weapons. It's diabolic. So listen to this, please share it, and then we talk about solution.
Security. It is patently impossible to discuss social engineering or the automation of a society, i.e. the engineering of a social automation system's silence weapons on a national or worldwide scale without implying extensive objectives of social control and destruction of human life, i.e. slavery and genocide. This manual is in itself an analog declaration of intent. Such a writing must be secured from public scrutiny, otherwise it might be recognized as a technically formal declaration of domestic war. Furthermore, when any person or group of persons in a position of great power and without full knowledge and consent of the public uses such knowledge and methodologies for economic conquest, it must be understood that a state of domestic warfare exists between said person or group of persons and the public. The solution of today's problems requires an approach which is ruthlessly candid, with no agonizing over religious, moral, or cultural values. You have qualified for this project because of your ability to look at human society with cold objectivity and yet analyze and discuss your observations and conclusions with others of similar intellectual capacity without the loss of discretion or humility. Such virtues are exercised in your own best interest. Do not deviate from them. Engineered in the last half of the decade of the 1940s, the new quiet war machine stood, so to speak, in sparkling gold-plated hardware on the showroom floor by 1954. With the creation of the maser in 1954, the promise of unlocking unlimited sources of fusion atomic energy from the heavy hydrogen and seawater and the consequent availability of unlimited social power was a possibility only decades away. The combination was irresistible. The Quiet War was quietly declared by the international elite at a meeting held in 1954. Although the silent weapon system was nearly exposed 13 years later, the evolution of the new weapon system has never suffered any major setbacks. This volume marks the 25th anniversary of the beginning of the Quiet War. Already this domestic war has had as many victories on many fronts throughout the world. Political introduction. In 1954, it was well recognized by those in positions of authority that it was only a matter of time, only a few decades, before the general public would be able to grasp and upset the cradle of power. For the very elements on the new silent weapon technology were as accessible for a public utopia as they were for providing a private utopia. The issue of primary concern, that of dominance, revolved around the subject of energy sciences. Energy. Energy is recognized as the key to all activity on Earth. All science is merely a means to an end. The means is knowledge, the end is control. Beyond this remains only one issue: who will be the beneficiary? In 1954, this was the issue of primary concern. Although the so-called moral issues were raised in view of the law of natural selection, it was agreed that a nation or world of people who will not use their intelligence are no better than animals who do not have intelligence. Such people are beasts of burden and stakes on the table by choice and consent. Consequently, in the interest of future world order, peace, and tranquility, it was decided to privately wage a quiet war against the American public with an ultimate objective of permanently shifting the natural and social energy, wealth of the undisciplined and irresponsible many into the hands of the self-disciplined, responsible, and worthy few. In order to implement this objective, it was necessary to create, secure, and apply new weapons which, as it turned out, were a class of weapons so subtle and sophisticated in their principle of operation and public appearance as to earn for themselves the name silent weapon. In conclusion, the objective of economic research as conducted by the magnates of capital, banking, and the industries of commodities or goods and services is the establishment of an economy which is totally predictable and manipulatable. In order to achieve a totally predictable economy, the low-class elements of society must be brought under total control. Example, they must be housebroken, trained, and assigned a yoke, a long-term social duty from a very early age, before they have an opportunity to question the propriety of the matter. In order to achieve such conformity, the lower-class family unit must be disintegrated by a process of increasing preoccupation of the parents and the establishment of government-operated daycare centers for the occupationally orphaned children. The quality of education given to the lower class must be of the poorest sort, so that the mode of ignorance isolating the inferior class from the superior class is and remains incomprehensible to the inferior class. With such an initial handicap, even bright lower-class individuals have little, if any, hope of extricating themselves from their assigned lot in this life. This form of slavery is essential to maintain some measure of social order, peace, and tranquility for the ruling upper class. Eventually, every individual element of the structure comes under computer control through a knowledge of personal preferences. Such knowledge, guaranteed by computer association of consumer preferences, UPC codes, zebra stripe pricing codes on packages with identified consumers, identified via association with the use of a credit card and later a permanent tattooed body number invisible under the normal ambient illumination. Summary. Economics is only a social extension of a natural energy system. It also has its three passive components. Because of the distribution of wealth and the lack of communication and lack of data, this field has been the last energy field for which a knowledge of these three passive components has been developed. Since energy is the key to all activity on the face of the earth, it follows that in order to attain a monopoly of energy, raw materials, goods, and services, and to establish a world system of slave labor, it is necessary to have a first-strike capability in the field of economics. In order to maintain our position, it is necessary that we have absolute first knowledge of the science of control over all economic factors and the first experience at engineering the world economy. In order to achieve such sovereignty, we must at least achieve this one end, that the public will not make either the logical or mathematical connection between economics and the other energy sciences, or learn to apply such knowledge. This is becoming increasingly difficult to control, because more and more businesses are making demands upon their computer programmers to create and apply mathematical models for the management of those businesses. It is only a matter of time before the new breed of private programmer economists will catch on to the far-reaching implications of the work begun at Harvard in 1948. The speed which they can communicate their warning to the public will largely depend upon how effective we have been at controlling the media, subverting education, and keeping the public distracted with matters of no real importance. The economic model. Economics as a social energy science has as a first objective the description of the complex way in which any given unit of resource is used to satisfy some economic want, Leontief matrix. The first objective, when it is extended to get the most product from the least or limited resources, comprises that objective of general military and industrial logistics known as operations research. See simplex method of linear programming. The Harvard Economic Research Project from 1948 was an extension of World War II operations research. Its purpose was to discover the science of controlling an economy, at first the American economy and then the world economy. The social welfare program is nothing more than an open-ended credit balance system which creates a false capital industry to give non-productive people a roof over their heads and food in their stomachs. This can be useful, however, because the recipients become state property in return for the gift, a standing army for the elite, for he who pays the piper picks the tune. Those who get hooked on the economic drug must go to the elite for a fix. In this method of introducing large amounts of stabilizing capacitance is by borrowing on the future credit of the world. This is a fourth law of motion on set and consists of performing an action and leaving the system before the reflected reaction returns to the point of action, a delayed reaction. This means the means of surviving the reaction is by changing the system before the reaction can return. By this means, politicians become more popular in their own time, and the public pays later. In fact, the measure of such a politician is the delay time. The same thing is achieved by a government by printing money beyond the limit of the gross national product, and the economic process called inflation. This puts a large quantity of money into the hand of the public and maintains a balance against their greed, creates a false self-confidence in them, and for a while stays the wolf from the door. They must eventually resort to war to balance the account, because war ultimately is merely the act of destroying the creditor, and the politicians are the publicly hired hitmen that justify the act to keep the responsibility and blood off the public conscience. See section on consent factors and social economic structuring. If the people really cared about their fellow man, they would control their appetites, greed, procreation, etc., so that they would not have to operate on a credit or welfare social system which steals from the worker to satisfy the bum. Since most of the general public will not exercise restraint, there are only two alternatives to reduce the economic inductance of the system. Let the populace bludgeon each other to death in war, which will only result in a total destruction of the living earth. Take control of the world by the use of economic silent weapons in a form of quiet warfare, and reduce the economic inductance of the world to a safe level by a process of benevolent slavery and genocide. The later option has been taken as the obviously better option. At this point, it should be crystal clear to the reader why absolute secrecy about these silent weapons is necessary. The general public refuses to improve its own mentality and its faith in its fellow man. It has become a herd of proliferating barbarians and, so to speak, a blight upon the face of the earth. They do not care enough about economic science to learn why they have not been able to avoid war despite religious morality, and their religious or self-gratifying refusal to deal with earthly problems renders the solution of the earthly problem unreachable to them. It is left to those few who are truly willing to think and survive as the fittest to survive, to solve the problem for themselves as the few who really care. Otherwise, exposure of the silent weapon would destroy our only hope of preserving the seed of the future true humanity. The personal paper trail. Personal buying habits, personal consumer preferences, checking accounts, credit card purchases, tagged credit card purchases, the credit card purchase of products bearing the UPC code, assets, checking accounts, savings accounts, real estate, business, automobile, safety deposit at the bank, stock market, liabilities, creditors, enemies, loans, government sources, welfare, Social Security, USDA, surplus food, doles, grants, subsidies, government sources via intimidation, Internal Revenue Service, OSHA, Census, etc., other government sources, surveillance of U.S. mail, habits, patterns, programming, strengths and weaknesses, activities, sports, hobbies, see legal, fear, anger, crime record, hospital records, drug sensitivities, reaction to pain, psychiatric records, fears, angers, disgust, adaptability, reactions to stimuli, violence, suggestibility or hypnosis, pain, pleasure, love, and sex, methods of coping of adaptability and behavior, consumption of alcohol, consumption of drugs, entertainment, religious factors influencing behavior, other methods of escaping from reality, payments, pay on time, payment of telephone bills, energy purchases, water purchases, repayment of loans, house payments, automobile payments, payments on credit cards, the political sensitivity, beliefs, contacts, positions, strengths, weaknesses, projects, activities, legal inputs, behavior control, excuses for investigation, search, arrest, or employment of force to modify behavior, court records, police records, driving record, reports made to police, insurance information, anti-establishment acquaintances, national input information, business sources via the IRS, prices of commodities, sales, investments in, stocks, inventory, production tools and machinery, buildings and improvements, the stock market, banks and credit bureaus, credit information, payment information, miscellaneous sources, polls and surveys, publications, telephone records, energy and utility purchases, and short list of outputs. Outputs create controlled situations, manipulation of the economy, hence society, control by control of compensation and income. sequence, allocates opportunities, destroys opportunities, controls the economic environment, controls the availability of raw materials, controls capital, controls bank rates, controls the inflation of the currency, controls the possession of property, controls industrial capacity, controls manufacturing, controls the availability of goods or commodities, controls the prices of commodities, controls services, the labor force, etc., controls payments to government officials, controls the legal functions, controls the personal data files, uncorrectable by the party slandered, controls advertising, controls media contact, controls material available for TV viewing, disengages attention from real issues, engages emotions, creates disorder, chaos, and insanity, controls design and more probing tax forms, controls surveillance, controls the storage of information, develops psychological analysis and profiles of individuals, controls legal functions, controls sociological factors, controls health options, preys on weakness, cripples strengths, leeches wealth and substance. The draft as a military service. Few efforts of human behavior modification are more remarkable or more effective than that of the socio-military institution known as the draft. A primary purpose of a draft or other such institution is to instill by intimidation in the young males of a society the uncritical conviction that the government is omnipotent. He is soon taught that a prayer is slow to reverse what a bullet can do in an instance. Thus, a man trained in a religious environment for 18 years of his life can, by this instrument of the government, be broken down, be purged of his fantasies and delusions in a matter of mere months. Once that conviction is instilled, all else becomes easy to instill. Even more interesting is the process by which a young man's parents, who perpetually love him, can be induced to send him off to war for his death. Although the scope of this work will not allow this matter to be expanded in full detail, nevertheless a coarse overview will be possible and can serve to reveal those factors which must be included in some numerical form in a computer analysis of social and war systems. We begin with a tentative definition of the draft. The draft, or selective service, is an institution of compulsory collective sacrifice and slavery devised by the middle-aged and elderly for the purpose of pressing the young into doing the public dirty work. It further serves to make the youth as guilty as the elders, thus making criticism of the elders by the youth less likely. Cattle. Those who will not use their brains are no better off than those who have no brains. And so this mindless school of jellyfish, father, mother, son, and daughter, become useful beasts of burden or trainers of the same. This concludes what is available in this document. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to listen, and I would highly encourage you to visit www.stopthecrime.net. It's where this document came from, and I will include links below in the description. And thank you very much again for listening. And get this out to your friends and family. Tell them about stopthecrime.net. Show them the article. You can download it from there.
I compressed the reading to about 20 minutes. You can go to the website to hear the entire document. It is a 1-hour reading, whereas you can also download the document. It was made into a book by the title Behold the Pale Horse, Exposing the New World Order by William Cooper. In closing, I will read you the warning of the FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover that he commented in 1956, over 60 years ago. The individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he cannot believe it exists. The American mind simply has not come to a realization of the evil which has been introduced into our midst. It rejects even the assumption that human creatures could expose a philosophy which must ultimately destroy all that is good and decent. Let me tell you, people, it's already done. This material is no longer censored. You can have it because it's already accomplished. And it's not done by humans. Satan is the one who came to kill, steal, and destroy. He is the liar and the father of all lies, said the Lord. He came through the Greys, the reptilians, by running the governments. They are behind the cabal, the Illuminati, the deep state, who deceive the whole world, working through the UN and the Vatican. We don't have to live like this. We have power in the name of Jesus. We liberate humanity one soul at a time, one heart at a time. Everyone, whomsoever willing to come to the light, will become light. And darkness has no power over light. We have the victory. We have power in Jesus Christ. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but divinely powerful for the destruction of fortresses, mighty to pull down strongholds. We are destroying speculations and every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of God, and we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. And we are ready to punish all disobedience whenever your obedience is complete. Praise the Lord. We have power in Jesus Christ.